Hey designers, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into creating smooth motion designs just like Airbnb. We will make this card to full screen interaction using Figma prototypes. Let's get started. You can follow along with this tutorial using the community file linked in the description. When you open the community file and come to the follow along page, you will find two artboards present. These two will be our start and end states. When creating prototypes, it is always a good idea to duplicate your starting artboard and then convert it into your ending state. I have found this approach to always be better than trying to draw a connection between your starting and end states. So I'll go ahead and duplicate the starting artboard. I will also rename the starting artboard to start. Now let's go through all the layers present inside this artboard. First, we have a main property frame. This contains a prop image frame and a text auto layout frame. Our main objective would be to animate the prop image frame. We also have another property frame, a header, a status bar, bottom nav, and a home indicator. Let's go back to our finished animation and see how the header animates. If we slow down this animation, we see that the header moves up and fades out. So in our second artboard, I'll move the header up a little bit, decrease the opacity, and add a layer blur of about 20. I will also take the property frame and align it to the top. Here we run into our first problem. The header is on top of the property frame. To fix this, we can move the header frame below the property frame. Make sure to make this change in both the starting and the second artboard. If you don't, then our interaction will look completely bugged out. I will also move the property frame to the top for now, but we will have to reorganize our layers a little bit later on. Next, we can remove all the elements that are not present in our final state. So the live tag can be removed. The share option is a little different, so it can be removed as well. The carousel can be removed. We can also change the opacity of the text auto layout frame to 0%. Let's resize the prop image frame to fit the entire width of our artboard. But before that, let's change the constraints of our image so that it does not resize with its parent frame. Select the image layer and change the constraints to center. Now we can change the width of our prop image frame to 430 and the height to 409. Align it to the top and middle. Now let's increase the size of our image and align it to the top. Make sure that you keep the size the same as the prop image frame. Now change the corner radius of the prop image frame to 0 to get that sharp corner. Let's reorder our layers a little bit. We know that the status bar will always remain on top, so let's go ahead and place it at the top in both our artboards and change the color of the elements inside the status bar. We can do this by selecting our status bar and going to selection color, changing the values from all zeros to all Fs. Let's look back at our finished animation again. This time let's focus on the bottom half. We can see that three things are happening here when we slow it down. The second property moves a little down, the navigation bar scales down and moves, and finally the property that the user clicks on expands onto the entire screen. Let's create these three animations. The first one is very simple to make. Let's push down the second property frame. Do this only on the second artboard. For the nav bar, hit K on your keyboard and scale the nav bar down. Now we can push it down a little bit and add a layer blur effect. We can change the amount to something crazy like 104. Now we can take our property frame and scale it to the bottom of our second artboard. Here we run into another problem. Our home indicator is now hidden behind. So let's go ahead and reorder all our layers one last time. We want to have our header at the bottom of all our layers, since this header does not really need to be above anything else. Next, we'll have our second property. This is the one that the user does not click on. Above this, we'll have our bottom nav. Our second property is below the bottom nav because the bottom nav is supposed to overlap onto our second property. Next, we have our first property. This is on top of everything else because this will take center stage when the user taps on it in our prototype. Finally, we have our home indicator and status bar as the top two layers. Because these two are OS level elements, they will supersede everything else. Perfect. All our layers are now in order. Let's add the remaining elements before we start prototyping. I will copy all the text, icons and images that are present in our final frame and paste it into our second frame. I will also group these layers and rename the group to locked. Then we can lock this group. You also want to move this locked group inside the property frame. Now we can copy this locked group into the start frame, specifically inside the property frame. We can push it down a little bit and change its opacity to 0%. Next, let's copy the remaining elements into our second frame. Copy the three icons and the pagination into our second frame. And finally, we can also add this footer with pricing into our frames. To do this, first add a duplicate of our second frame. This is also a good time to rename our second frame to middle, and we can name the duplicate as final. Paste the footer inside the middle artboard and push it out of view. Make sure that your layers are ordered so that the status bar and home indicator are on top. Paste the footer inside the final artboard as well and reorder your layers again. We can also add a layer blur to our footer in the middle artboard. Great, after a lot of setup, our artboards are finally ready for prototyping. Go to the Prototype tab and select the property frame inside our first artboard. Draw a connection to the second artboard. Change the animation type to Smart Animate and the easing to Gentle. Now draw a connection with the middle artboard selected to the third artboard. Change the activation to After Delay. The delay time to 0. Figma will change it to 1 millisecond by default, and change the easing to ease in and out with a timing of 200 milliseconds. We can now play our prototype and see it in action. To restart your prototype, just hit R on your keyboard and it should reset to the first screen. Let's add a way to reset the entire thing within our prototype. Go to the final artboard and draw connection to the first artboard after selecting the back button. Change the easing to Gentle, and that's it. You've just made a buttery smooth animation using Figma prototypes. Make sure to check out the community file down in the description below. Thanks a ton for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe for more design insights. Until next time, happy designing.